We all know that brands like Ford or Tesla are named after people. But what about nicotine, sandwiches, or Braille? Yeah, they were all named after real people. And most had no idea they'd become household words. I'm Mike with List 25, and here are 25 everyday things that are secretly named after their inventors. You know that feeling of curling up with a good book? Well, blind people get to enjoy that too, thanks to a teenage genius named Louis Braille. At just 3 years old, Louis wandered into his dad's leather workshop, found a stitching awl, and accidentally blinded himself in one eye. The infection spread, and soon he lost his sight completely. But from that tragedy came a breakthrough. At 15, Louis invented Braille, a system of raised dots that lets blind people read and write by touch. A total game changer. And he didn't stop there. He used his invention to teach other blind students everything from math to music. Eventually, he became the first blind professor at the Royal Institute for Blind Youth in Paris. He didn't just read between the lines, he actually raised them for all visually impaired people, which is just brilliant. You know that moment in a song when everything drops and a saxophone solo just takes over? Jazz fans live for that. But the sax's journey started long before it joined the jazz club. Back in the 1840s, Belgian inventor Adolphe Sax wanted to create something new, an instrument with the warmth of woodwinds and the punch of brass. After a lot of trial and error, the saxophone was born. But not everyone was jazzed about it. Adolphe had a reputation for being brilliant, but annoyingly arrogant. So orchestras weren't too eager to embrace his invention, and the sax got sidelined. Then came an opening. The French military was hunting for a bold new sound. Adolphe pitched the sax and boom, it caught on. Marching bands were hooked. Fast forward to the 20s and jazz musicians found their soulmate. The sax wasn't just loud or smooth, it could speak. And the rest? Pure music history. Next, how about an invention with a little drama? Every year, millions flock to the Eiffel Tower, awestruck. But guess who saw that coming and wanted his own spotlight? George W.G. Ferris. When the Eiffel Tower wowed crowds at the 1889 Paris exhibition, Ferris, a civil engineer, wasn't just clapping, he was plotting too. Then in 1893, plans began for the world's Columbian exhibition in Chicago, and Ferris showed up with a wild idea. That same night, he sketched a giant rotating wheel and pitched it. The committee laughed it off, just calling him crazy. In their defense, this design was already present, but not at the huge scale Ferris was planning. But Ferris didn't back down. He rallied fellow engineers to back his design's safety, returned with proof, and this time the committee said yes. When the first ever Ferris wheel opened, it stole the show, just as Ferris wanted. Sure, nothing tops the sight of the Eiffel Tower, but Ferris gave it a serious run. A little jealousy probably isn't always so bad. Do you ever notice how every luxury home listing brags about having a jacuzzi? It's basically shorthand for, you've made it. But that bubbling backyard spa wasn't just made for soaking in style, it was born out of a family's search for relief. The family in question was the Jacuzzi brothers, 7 Italian immigrants who ran an invention-focused company in California. Planes, pumps, tools, you name it, they built it. But when a young family member developed severe rheumatoid arthritis, they switched gears. To help ease the pain, the brothers created a portable hydrotherapy pump. It worked so well, they figured, why not bring the spa treatment home? So they built a self-contained hot tub. Just like that, relaxation became a household luxury. At first, it was called a Roman bath. But let's be honest, that name didn't exactly pop. So people just started calling it by the company's name, Jacuzzi, and it stuck. Now, speaking of something else that stuck, gambling isn't usually a noble hobby. But for John Montagu, the 4th Earl of Sandwich, it led to one of the world's favorite meals. Legend has it that the Earl was deep into a card game, too focused to get up for dinner. So he asked for something quick, salted beef between 2 slices of toasted bread. No mess, no fork. Just a meal you could hold while holding a hand of cards. Soon, others at the table started saying, well, I'll have the same as sandwich. And the name stuck. But there were other versions of the story. Some say the Earl was just buried in political work and needed a no-fuss desk meal. Either way, the world got the sandwich. So, the next time you grab one, tip your hat to the guy who made multitasking delicious. Now, since I'm talking about accidental snack inventions, this next one is just right there. It was the 1940s. Near Eagle Pass, Texas, sat an army base, and just across the border was Piedras Negras, Mexico. There, Ignacio Nacho Anya worked at a restaurant. One evening, just as the place was closing, a few wives of U.S. Army officers walked in, hungry. The problem? The chef had gone home. But Nacho wasn't turning them away. He dashed into the kitchen, looked around, and got creative. He grabbed tostadas, sprinkled on some cheese, and popped them into the oven to melt. A few minutes later, he topped them off with jalapeno slices and hoped for the best. And the ladies loved it. When asked what the dish was called, Ignacio Nachos simply said, "Nachos Special." Word spread fast, and the snack became a hit. Eventually, the name was shortened to just Nachos, and the rest is cheesy, crunchy history. So maybe take this as a nudge to head to the kitchen and get creative. Who knows? You might whip up a masterpiece. Let's step away from food to something less appetizing. By 1793, the French Revolution had turned into a bloodbath. The people had just executed King Louis XVI and were out for more. Anyone tied to the old corrupt government was hunted down, and in just 6 weeks, nearly 1,200 people were killed, often in gruesome, sloppy ways. That's when Dr. Joseph Ignace Guillotine stepped in. He wasn't trying to make executions more common, just less brutal. As a doctor and member of the National Assembly, he argued that if the state insisted on killing people, it should at least be fast and relatively painless. So, France passed a new law. All executions would now be carried out by machine. And then came the guillotine. A tall wooden frame with a heavy angled blade that dropped clean and quick. And clean it was. In just 47 days, 1,376 people lost their heads. Dr. Guillotine didn't particularly design the machine, but his name stuck with it forever. It may have been a more humane tool of execution, but make no mistake, it was still a mass execution machine. Every name, date, and death toll in this list had to be double-checked. Now, if you've made it this far, that's not luck, that is trust, and I'd love for you to hit that subscribe button if I earned it. Back to the list. If you're a fan of Marvel and Iron Man, Tony Stark, you'll remember how he built his first arc reactor and suit to stop tiny metal fragments from reaching his heart. Those sharp bits from the explosion? That's shrapnel. By definition, shrapnel is any flying debris from a blast, metal shards, glass, or whatever gets sent flying. It seems too chaotic to be considered an invention, but it actually is. Henry Shrapnel, a British soldier in the 1800s, specialized in artillery and in finding more efficient ways to hurt people. His big invention? A shell that exploded mid-air and scattered smaller projectiles over a wide area. The shrapnel shell. It was terrifyingly effective. During World War II, shrapnel caused most of the artillery-inflicted wounds on the battlefield, and even today, bombs and other explosive weapons are still based on that same deadly concept. Let's just say Stark survived, but real history wasn't as kind. You know that feeling when you see something or someone so stunning it's like you're hypnotized? So you say you're mesmerized? Well, you're not entirely wrong. The word comes from an actual person, Franz Anton Mesmer, an 18th century physician with some very strange ideas about medicine. Mesmer believed that there was an invisible fluid inside the body, and when that fluid got blocked, it caused illness. His solution? Unblock it, using magnets. Yeah, really. He would wave magnets, and later just his hands, around patients, putting them into trance-like states. It all looked dramatic and mysterious, and soon the mesmerist craze spread. But eventually, a scientific commission exposed him as a fraud, and Mesmer lost his medical license. Still, his name stuck around. So the next time something mesmerizes you, just be glad it's not a guy in a powdered wig waving magnets in your face. But let's move on from this to an invention that actually saves lives. Few things are more devastating than a cancer diagnosis. But if it's caught in the early stages, there's hope and a strong fighting chance. One test that's helped countless women is the Pap Smear. The test itself isn't exactly pleasant. Cells are scraped from a woman's cervix to look for early signs of cervical cancer, but it is a lifesaver. Women in their 20s are advised to get one at least once every 3 years. The full name is the Papanicolaou test. It was invented by George Papanicolaou, a Greek-born doctor who had quite the career path in his lifetime. He was a soldier, a violinist, a zoologist, a rug salesman, you name it. But thankfully, somewhere along the line, he created the Pap Smear test and helped save millions of lives before moving on to explore his other passions. Since I'm in the biological field, let's look at another invention that looks quite simple, but someone actually came up with it. Ever been stuck on an issue that seemed so tough, but when you found the solution for it, it was so simple you wondered how you didn't think of it earlier? That was Julius Richard Petri's moment. He was working at the Imperial Health Office in Berlin under Robert Koch, basically the king of bacteriology then. This was the late 1800s, and microbiologists had one big headache: how to grow and study germs without contaminating them. The go-to method involved placing a heavy bell jar over a glass plate with gelatin, but it was clunky and inconvenient. That's when Petri had a light bulb moment. Just use a shallow dish with a slightly larger lid to keep it covered. Simple, right? His invention was so straightforward that the paper he wrote explaining it was barely 300 words long. But that simple tweak became a game changer. And today, every lab still uses his invention, the Petri dish, almost exactly as he designed it. Speaking of jars and lid coverings, here's how another simple invention changed the game. You know that trusty mason jar in your kitchen? The one that's probably holding jam, pickles, or last night's leftovers? It's a household staple, and for good reason. It's simple, practical, and timeless. Back in 1858, John Landis Mason, a tinsmith, had a light bulb moment. He created a glass jar with a screw-top lid and a rubber-sealed band that made it airtight. This clever design meant food could be preserved longer, and the jars could be reused, saving people a lot of hassle. You'd think Mason would have cashed in big on this invention, right? Sadly, not so. When his patent expired in 1879, companies jumped on the bandwagon, mass-producing mason jars without paying him a cent. The only thing Mason really got was the honor of having his name attached to the jars. And well, he didn't even get to enjoy that. He died broke. But hey, at least we're still using his invention today. Now, moving on to another invention that's still going strong today. You know how every plastic container gets called Tupperware these days? Even if it's not? That's the legacy of Earl Tupper. Back in the 1930s, Tupper was just a guy bouncing between odd jobs trying to survive. Things shifted when he landed at DuPont, a chemical company in 1937. There, he got his hands on polyethylene slag, a tough black plastic byproduct nobody knew what to do with. But Earl did. He turned it into lightweight, unbreakable containers with airtight lids inspired by paint cans. He launched the Tupperware company. But at first, no one knew exactly what his product was for. Sales flopped, until Brownie Wise stepped in. She introduced house parties where women demonstrated how to use it. Boom, sales took off, and Earl Tupper made a fortune. He eventually sold the company for $16 million, divorced his wife, renounced his U.S. citizenship to avoid taxes, and bought an island near Costa Rica to kick back till he died. Not bad for a guy who just wanted to keep leftovers fresh. Ever winced at the sound of something way too loud? Like a blender at 7 a.m. or a jet engine overhead? And if you ever wanted to measure the sound, you then probably needed the decibel. Now, the name Bell in decibel is short for Alexander Graham Bell, the same guy who brought us the telephone. Back in the early 1900s, telephone engineers needed a way to measure sound loss over phone lines, so they created the Bell. It measures how intense the sound is. Whispers start around 30 decibels. Normal conversation hits 60, and a jet engine? That's a roaring 140. So Bell didn't just help us talk, he also gave us the numbers to prove who's being way too loud. But what if you couldn't risk making any sound at all? That's where this next invention comes in. For those in long-distance relationships, communication can be tough, right? But we've got smartphones and social media. Back in the 1800s, it was a whole different struggle. Getting messages across vast distances was a serious problem. Samuel Morse was bothered by this issue until he realized that while telegraphs could send electrical signals far and wide, they didn't have a simple way to turn those signals into messages. That's where the idea for Morse Code came in. He teamed up with Alfred Vail, another engineer, and together they created a series of dots, short signals, and dashes, long signals, to represent letters and numbers. In 1844, the first successful transmission went through with the message, "What hath God wrought?" Morse Code changed the game. Messages could be sent without speaking or writing. And of course, the military got to adopt it too. At least we know this from all the action movies where soldiers send those secret-coded messages in the middle of intense missions. While Morse code got into war camps, this next invention was quietly being born right inside one. These days, it seems like every woman you know is enrolled in a Pilates class, and for good reason. It's the rare workout that leaves your muscles trembling, but your mind as calm as if you just meditated in a spa. But here's the twist. Its creator, Joseph Pilates, was born a sickly German child. Joseph, however, wanted to be strong, so he took up bodybuilding at a young age and rebuilt himself so successfully he even modeled for anatomical drawings. Then, World War I erupted, and the British interned him as a German enemy. But even at an internment camp, Pilates was still the dedicated fitness guy. To help fellow detainees stay strong and recover from injuries, he rigged springs to hospital beds so that patients could start toning their muscles even while they were still bedbound. It worked so well that after the war, Pilates brought his method to New York. It became a huge success, and the exercise was named after him. But that's not the only fitness exercise with an inventor. Most people have heard of burpees, and some even joke that the name comes from how they make you want to burp mid-set. While this full-body move can knock the wind out of you, it's actually named after its inventor, Royal Huddleston Burpee Sr. He created the exercise in 1939 as part of his PhD thesis in applied physiology at Columbia University's Teacher College. It was originally meant to be a quick way to assess fitness levels, but if you ask any gym goer, they're basically a love-hate relationship in exercise form. So, how does it go? You first start in a squat with your hands on the ground, then kick your feet back into a plank, arms straight. Next, you hop your feet forward to stand back up. Sounds simple, right? Well, try doing a few in front of a green screen because you can't. And also try doing a few in a row and let me know how that went. Now to the next invention that doesn't involve stressing your muscles. That waterproof coat you throw on during a downpour, it's not just randomly called a Mackintosh. The name goes all the way back to the 19th century and a clever Scottish chemist named Charles Mackintosh. In 1823, he came up with a way to make fabric water-resistant by sandwiching rubber, dissolved in coal tar naphtha, between two layers of cloth. Stylish? No, that's debatable. But it did get the job done and keep your clothes dry. Mostly. As with most inventions, the early versions weren't anywhere near perfect. They could get sticky in heat, stiff in cold, and other discomforts too. But the material kept getting improved, and things took a sure turn for the better once vulcanized rubber was discovered and used. Another dress code that goes way back to an inventor. We all know the leotard, that tight, stretchy one-piece outfit worn by gymnasts, dancers, and sometimes swimmers. But surprise, it is not a modern fashion invention. The name actually comes from Jules Leotard, a 19th century Frenchman who ditched his law studies in 1859 to become a trapeze artist. Bit of a dramatic career switch, sure, but not too shocking when you learn his dad ran a gym and a swimming pool. Jules trained by practicing flips over the water, and he got so good he started performing in public. He'd somersaulted across 5 trapeze with nothing but old mattresses to catch him. Clearly the man didn't fear gravity or had a death wish. To pull off those stunts without getting tangled in fabric, Jules designed a snug, knitted outfit that wouldn't flap or snag. He wore this new style for the rest of his career, and the name stuck to him. The dress, however, only became popular after Leotard's untimely death. In 1905, 11-year-old Frank Epperson from California accidentally invented summer's favorite treat. He mixed water and powdered soda with a stir stick and left it outside overnight. The temperature dropped, and by morning, voila! It had frozen solid, with the stick now perfectly placed as a handle. Like any excited 11-year-old, he named it whatever came to mind, the Eppsicle. But Frank didn't leave this invention behind in his childhood. When he became an adult, he patented the invention and rebranded it with a slightly more grown-up name, Popsicle. Why the switch? Well, according to Frank, his kids always called it Popsicle, and honestly, that corny dad joke energy kind of makes sense. But it could just simply be a smart mashup of lollipop and icicle. Either way, the frozen treat caught on. What started as a happy accident in the backyard turned into a classic dessert. Now, speaking of tasty treats, here's another one that's a lot of people's favorite. Say M&M's too fast and you might think of the rapper Eminem. But nope, these candies do not owe their name to the rap god. They were making waves way before he got into the scene. M&M's are some of the most popular candies on the planet, and I'm talking about over 400 million made every single day. These delicious treats come in all kinds of flavors: peanut, almond, crispy, mint, dark, white chocolate, and the best kind of all, peanut butter, you name it. But let's talk about those two little letters, M and M. What do they even stand for? Turns out they're the initials of two candy royalty heirs. The first M is for Forrest Mars, son of the Mars Company founder. The second, Bruce Murray, whose dad started Hershey's. The two teamed up, pulled their chocolatey powers, and what we have, as a result, is the snack that just melts sweet joy in your mouth. Because as we know, it melts in your mouth, not in your hands. Do you have a favorite steak style? Medium rare, well done, maybe a little pepper crust? But what about Salisbury steak? Before it became the go-to cafeteria classic, it was actually a 19th century doctor's idea of medicine. Dr. James Salisbury was convinced that starches and vegetables were ruining people's health. Awesome. He's got my vote. His solution? Meat. Lots of it. He spent years perfecting what he believed to be the healthiest meal possible: a ground beef patty, grilled, not boiled, and served with a cup of coffee. This steak retained all its B vitamins and was easy to digest, making it, in his eyes, the ultimate cure for digestive woes. He wasn't trying to just cook a tasty meal. He was on a mission to heal people with beef. And honestly, given all the high-protein diets today, the guy might have been onto something. So the next time you see Salisbury steak on the menu, maybe give it a try and whisper, "Thank you, Salisbury," in between bites. All right, we are almost wrapping this up, and congrats on making it this far. Now buckle up, because these last three inventions, you will not see them coming. In the mid-19th century, James Thomas Brudenell, British Army officer and the 7th Earl of Cardigan, had a go-to look: a knitted wool jacket. Office, streets, even the battlefield, he wore it. And yes, even during the infamous charge of the Light Brigade in the Crimean War, which Brunel is well known for, the man was rocking his knit like it was armor. But the sweater was practical, not just stylish. It kept you warm and allowed you to move your arms quite freely. Soldiers appreciated it, and soon enough, the look caught on. And so, just like our earlier Earl of Sandwich, Cardigan became known for this style of cloth that when others started copying it, they named it after him. And that's how the cardigan was born, going from one man's favorite style to your go-to sweater on a rainy day. Here's the next one, an invention so useful, it ruffled a lot of feathers. It almost sounds too perfect that the guy from the Fast and Furious movies is named Vin Diesel, even though that is just it's not his real name, and it just so happens to be all about fast cars and explosive engines. But here's the real twist. Diesel fuel was actually named after a real person. Rudolf Diesel was a German engineer who, in the late 1800s, invented an engine that didn't need coal. It could run on a fuel that, until then, was basically industrial trash. Back in 1851, the first oil refinery in Scotland tossed aside a byproduct no one cared about. But Diesel saw potential in it. In 1894, he invented the diesel engine to run on that discarded fuel, and it worked. Too well, apparently. Because not long after, in 1913, he mysteriously died at sea. Some say it was an accident, but the darker side of the story is that coal magnates wanted him gone. Diesel's engine threatened their empire, and they knew it. One day, a journalist noticed something odd while writing. The regular ink used in old pens took forever to dry and always smudged, but the ink used to print newspapers dried super fast with no mess. So he tried using newspaper ink in his pen, but it was too thick to flow properly. That's when he started tinkering and finally created the pen that could handle thick ink without smudging. This was the first ballpoint pen, and the inventor called it Biro. His name? Laszlo Biro. His invention caught the attention of a British clerk who realized this pen would be perfect for airplane navigators. And so the British government bought the patent, and soon the Royal Air Force was armed with Biro pens. Then it quickly spread from Air Force pilots to school kids scribbling notes in class. Everyone wanted a Biro. And that's a wrap. But before you go, here's a quick trivia nugget for you. I'm laughing because it's a little easy. What invention made by a doctor named Salisbury was originally intended to cure digestive problems? Was it A, protein shake, B, Salisbury steak, C, chicken broth, or D, beef jerky? I would love to see who knows that, or more importantly, who doesn't know that. So leave your comments below. It turns out dozens of everyday things are secretly little tributes to people from history, but if you thought that was interesting, just wait till you see what symbols you've been misreading your whole life. Check out our next video, 25 symbols that lost their original meanings. It's a fun one. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like, hit that bell so you don't miss out on anything new, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe.